Number 10. Poison Ivy from Batman the Animated Series. This happened in the episode House and Garden. This whole episode is very surreal. Ivy appears to have reformed and settled down with her former doctor from Arkham Asylum and adopted his 2 sons, and is basically living a peaceful domestic existence. But there are crimes occurring around the city, and these crimes are being perpetrated by giant monstrous plant creatures. So of course, Batman is on her case. But he can't figure it out. It all seems legit until he learns that the doctor didn't have sons, he had daughters. Ivy had been using the family life as a ruse, and the doctor is a DNA sample to use as a base for her plant people, who she was sending out to commit crimes. Since they aged and died quickly, she was just replacing them every few days, and in the meantime they were acting as her family. But the ultimate reveal came in her showdown with Batman, who figured she could only clone from genetic material that she had, but he didn't think that included herself. That's right, he was fighting a plant version of Poison Ivy, while the real Ivy was on a flight out of Gotham. He never saw it coming. He was also super concerned when she started melting. You know, as you should be. Number 9. Red Hood, Jason Todd. The Under the Hood, or Red Hood, depending on which adaptation you're going for, storyline is an iconic one at this point. The story that officially reintroduced Jason Todd after he was revealed to be Clayface in Hush, but that would be retcons being both him and Clayface. Yay, retcons. When Batman was facing the Red Hood, he had to contend with the fact that the clues were leading up to something that should have been impossible. That Red Hood was Jason Todd, the second Robin who had died at the hands of the Joker. And more than just that, that Jason had been alive for years and training and operating under his nose. Although, I mean, who thinks to look for people who are dead? But then again, this is the DC universe. No one really stays dead, do they? Still, trauma pass? Number 8. The Joker, Batman Who Laughs. The Batman Who Laughs is everywhere since his debut in the Dark Knight's Metal event. At the time of this recording, he's having a showdown against Apex Lex, because he also has plans on top of plans. However, his creation was a move that the Bruce Wayne of his negative multiverse did not see coming. When the Joker went too far and caused Batman to snap, quite literally, he snapped the Joker's neck, Bruce was not prepared for the fact that the Joker had infused his body with a toxin that Batman then inhaled, which slowly Jokerized him from within, turning him into the Batman Who Laughs. The most terrifying part, Bruce did eventually figure out what was happening, but he didn't care, and instead embraced it and began killing his friends and allies, starting with the Bat family. Number 7. Hush. We're talking comic book Hush, so Thomas Elliot, not Riddler Hush. The Riddler will be on here, but for his own story arc. Thomas Elliot was a childhood friend of Bruce's who appeared out of nowhere and would turn out to actually hate Bruce and have a grudge against him. This was because he was jealous that Bruce's parents died and Bruce inherited their fortunes, because he had tried to kill his parents but failed. He only got one. He wanted that money. Now for some, the Thomas Elliot reveal was very obvious. You know, obvious villain is obvious. Ooh, so the guy who it looked like it was. Why couldn't Batman figure this out? Well, it was very human. He didn't want to suspect one of his few good childhood memories. To have yet another thing be tarnished, it's really sad when you think about it, which I clearly have. Number 6. Onomatopoeia. Kevin Smith has written some Batman comics, Batman Cacophony and The Widening Gyre, and well, mileage varies on how in character Batman is in them. Batman was very happy in these comics for the most part, and got back together with a rather prominent but oft-times forgotten love interest, Silver St. Cloud. It did not work out well for her. Throughout this arc, Batman is tracking a villain named Onomatopoeia, who appropriately enough only speaks in sound effects. At the same time, a new hero has arrived on the scene, Baphomet. And after working with him only a few times, Batman invites him to the Batcave and to meet Silver St. Cloud, his girlfriend, just revealing all the things, which culminates in the reveal that Baphomet was Onomatopoeia, and he kills Silver right there, slits her throat. So did he outsmart Batman, or was Batman just not at his most detective-like in this arc, distracted by happiness? Number 5. The Court of Owls. The Court of Owls was one of the most well-received Batman storylines of the New 52. In it, we once more revamped the death of Bruce's parents. This is from tragic accident to full-blown conspiracy. There is a society of Gotham's elite pulling the strings and ultimately manipulating Batman, pulling him into a literal maze that nearly breaks his mind and causes him to have some very terrifying hallucinations, such as himself mutating into a giant owl, which is a great cover. This society was operating for centuries and Batman had no idea. The organization only came came to his attention when they made their presence a bit more obvious on purpose to lure him in, which is to say nothing of the Talon stuff. Number 4. Dr. Hugo Strange. Hugo Strange is actually one of Batman's oldest antagonists and would evolve into being one of the most dangerous. Hugo Strange was a psychologist who would deduce Batman's true identity as Bruce Wayne and use it to torment him in his personal life, as well as also take on the mantle of Batman himself and at times pretend to be Bruce Wayne too, all to mess with Bruce's mind. He would do things like get Child Protective Services to remove Jason Todd, attack Bruce's public image and company, and also set up clandestine meetings to auction off Batman's secret identity to his other villains. This was a move that would seemingly get him killed for a time, and he was a ghost and then he wasn't a ghost. It was great. Hugo Strange is at his most dangerous when Batman is unaware that he has been found out, and Strange waits, biding his time to see how he can twist what he now knows to his advantage. In the animated series, he used a machine to pull the knowledge directly out of Bruce's subconscious. It was intense. Professor Strange, not Doctor Strange, because that would cause problems, even though Hugo was there first. Number 3. Bane. What list of outsmarting Batman would be complete without Bane? Some of you may even be surprised that he's not number 1. Well, here's the thing. Bane figured out who Batman was from his prison cell and had devised a plan to take him down before he ever even got to Gotham. The plan? Release all of Batman's enemies at once in a massive Arkham breakout, causing Batman to run himself ragged rounding them all up. It was then, when Batman was at his weakest and pretty depressed, that Bane would emerge to fight him in his own home. Not the Batcave, not the streets of Gotham, but Wayne Manor itself. It was a devastating play, and for an exhausted Batman, too much. He loses handily to Bane, who famously breaks his back over his knee. Batman never saw this one coming, but how could he have? Even if he wanted to, that Arkham breakout was brilliant. It's also from an earlier era that doesn't pretend that Batman could just round up all his villains without even breaking a sweat. Being Batman takes effort sometimes. It's really exhausting. When does he sleep? Number 2. Ra's al Ghul. We're going to the DCEU for this one, although with Ra's you have choices. This one is just one of my faves because it's so squicky. So we're going to be looking at Batman Beyond for this, where an aged Bruce Wayne is lamenting his lost youth. This is after Terry takes him to a really tacky Batman musical that bums him out. At that moment, Talia appears and offers him the chance to use the Lazarus Pit to return himself to his former glory so they can have a life together. And for a moment, he agrees. He undergoes one treatment, which returns him to a younger form, though far from his prime still, and is rewarded with a kiss from Talia. Only Bruce decides it's really too unnatural and that he can't go through with it. And it is then revealed that Ra's has taken over Talia's body and was using it to seduce Bruce, so that he could then take over his body and take over his resources by returning to Gotham and saying he was a long-lost Wayne heir. Bruce didn't see this coming at first, not only because of his feelings for Talia, but also from not being able to conceive of a father doing that to their own child. Number 1. The Riddler from Riddle Me That. That's right, the Riddler, often mocked by the superhero and supervillain community alike. But when the Riddler pulls it together, he is a formidable opponent who can and has bested Batman. Case in point, Riddle Me That. This is a story that featured a sexy version of the Riddler. It was happening at the time. I don't know, he got plastic surgery, he was painting his nails and had guy liner and a neck tattoo. It was a look. He sets up a seemingly obvious plot with a set of clues leading to a museum heist, and Batman believes he's deciphered everything. He shows up and stops the Riddler, and he's getting arrested. He gets the manuscript back, it's all going great. Or so he thought. Only this time the Riddler was more concerned with winning than with leaving riddles for Batman to actually figure out. He had many people in on this heist, acting as though they hated him, but they were actually his allies all along, even the arresting officer. Because of this, he managed to get his hands on the item he wanted and escape, all under Batman's nose. I don't care, cheesy or cool, I love the Riddler.
And at number 10, Victor Zsasz. Victor Zsasz is a serial killer that we've only seen adapted into live action once, in the Gotham series. And to be frank, he's really not all that scary compared to his comic or even video game counterparts. Every time Zsasz kills a victim, he gives himself a new mark on his flesh. His skin is covered in scars, one for each of the lives that he's taken. And by the looks of it, he's arguably one of Gotham's most efficient killers. He had been born wealthy, but after his parents died, he gambled all of his money away and fell into a depression in which he realized that life was pointless. So he decided decided that he'd go around murdering people for fun instead, something that became a full-time job of his. Moving on to number 9, Jason Todd. For us to see Jason Todd exist in the world of the Batman, that would mean we would need to witness something else. One of Batman's Robins getting murdered, in one of the most brutal ways possible thanks to the Joker, with a crowbar after experiencing a severe beatdown from the Clown Prince of Crime's thugs. That would definitely be a bold move, and seeing Jason Todd come back from the dead would be quite frightful. While we don't think Jason as Red Hood would make for a terrifying villain in general, it's all about the context in this case. And when it comes to Jason Todd, his backstory is one that we do not want to relive anytime soon up on the big screen. Moving on to number 8, the Mad Monk. The Mad Monk, also known simply as the Monk, is one of Batman's earliest foes, having first appeared in Detective Comics issue 31 back in 1939, created by Bob Kane and Gardner Fox. Initially, he was depicted as a vampire who wore a red monk outfit. Later on, it's established that Batman believes the monk isn't actually a vampire, but rather uses hypnosis to manipulate his victims and foes. The monk was then reinvented decades later, into a post-Civil War plantation owner in New Orleans who was subjected to a voodoo ritual by his vengeful ex-slaves. He ends up transforming into an undead version of himself, and later, when encountering Batman, would turn the Dark Knight into a vampire too, causing Batman to have to be exorcised thanks to a serum. Up next, number 7, the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow's jam is literally fear. He uses a toxin that causes his victims to see their worst fears, their most dreadful nightmares, as if they were real and right in front of them. While the Scarecrow has appeared in previous adaptations, specifically Batman Begins, there's always the chance that he would return to this new franchise. But we'd hope that this time around the scare factor would be amped up. Christopher Nolan did a good job with the character, but Scarecrow's abilities could really be pushed further on the big screen, even to the likes of some of the terrifying images that we saw in the Batman Arkham Asylum video game, which may be one of the best boss battles that the series has ever seen. Moving on to number 6, the Court of Owls. While we think that the Court of Owls would make for a fantastic and captivating antagonist in the new Batman film, we also think that their corruption that lurks around every corner of Gotham City may be a bit too intense for a film that relaunches the Batman franchise. But hey, prove us wrong. The Court of Owls first appeared in the New 52 back in Batman Volume 2 Issue 3, which led up to an insane conflict in which they held Batman hostage and the hero had to face his innermost darkness while going mad and trying to escape their labyrinth. They are an organized crime group and secret society that have existed in Gotham since colonial times, kidnapping children performers from the circus and transforming them into assassins. They've got their own army of assassins known as the Talons, who can even be brought back from the dead. So all in all, secret society with links all over Gotham City who have undead assassins. Yeah, pretty scary. In at number 5, the Batman Who Laughs. The Batman Who Laughs is arguably one of the Dark Knight's most threatening foes. He's essentially the combination of the Joker and Batman. All of the Joker's desire for chaos, destruction, and insanity mixed with Bruce Wayne's intellect, strategizing, and technological savvy. It's a killer combination, quite literally. One that occurs in the Dark Multiverse when Bruce Wayne kills the Joker and the Joker's body lets out a toxin that our hero then inhales. He begins to lose his mind, kills off the members of the Bat family, enslaves his Robins, turning them into rabid dogs, then kills off the rest of the Justice League before teaming up with an evil demonic entity to take out the Prime Timeline Batman and destroy the regular multiverse. Yeah, dude is an ambitious villain. He was so popular amongst fans that after the Dark Knight's Metal event in which he first debuted, he stuck around for a solo series that pins him up against Batman in one of the most intense conflicts that Bruce has ever faced. Moving on to number 4, Dr. Death. Oh, what a name. Dr. Death is by far one of the most physically terrifying villains to ever hit the panels of a Batman comic. He is also one of the oldest. Debuting initially in Detective Comics issue 29 back in 1939, the character was Batman's first reoccurring foe, who back in the Golden Age developed a death chemical agent from a pollen extract. He uses this chemical agent to try to extort money from the wealthy citizens of Gotham. He gets real scary though in the New 52, when a new version of the villain appears in Batman issue 25 as part of Batman's 0 year. This time, he was a disgruntled scientist employed by Wayne Enterprises, who ended up murdering several people with a serum which causes uncontrollable bone growth. It's with this retcon that he gets his new upgraded horrific appearance, which is a result of him having tested the serum on himself. Just imagine coming face to face with that in the middle of the night. Yeah. Yikes. And at 3, Cornelius STIRK. STIRK is very similar to the Scarecrow in the sense that he uses fear to manipulate his victims. His abilities allow him to make others see him as someone else in order to trick them and get close to them. He creates hallucinations via telepathy. But here is where it gets creepy. STIRK believes that he needs the nutrients and hormones of human hearts in order to stay alive, and the best way to consume human hearts is to prepare them with norepinephrine, which occurs by inducing fear into the victim prior to their death. He was first sent to Arkham Asylum at the age of 16 for trying to kill a classmate, but manipulated his way out of the asylum after being certified sane thanks to the use of his powers on his doctors. He also isn't a big time villain, so the chances of him actually making it into a Batman movie kinda slim. And at number 2, Professor Pig. Professor Pig is one nasty fellow. First appearing in Batman issue 666, actually, back in 2007, he's been described by creator Grant Morrison as being one of the weirdest, most insane characters that's ever been in Batman. Morrison also stated that it was their intention to make him seem genuinely disturbed and disconnected, and they definitely did that. Pig's name is a play on the actual theater play Pygmalion, in which the protagonist has a desire to transform people into an idealized state. Pig strives to do that, wanting to make people perfect, attempting to release an addictive identity-destroying drug via his Dollotrons, an army of genderless lobotomized humans with masks fused to their faces. He's a skilled surgeon and talented scientist and chemist. In order to make these Dollotrons, he goes to horrific extents. The process is implied to involve brain surgery, genital mutilation, and a cocktail of mind-altering drugs. He's also got hundreds of them, so yeah. Dude is pretty messed up. And finally, in at number 1, the Dollmaker. Barton Mathis, aka the Dollmaker, is one of the most fucked up villains to appear in DC Comics. Debuting in the New 52 Detective Comics issue 1, the Dollmaker was influenced as a child by his father, who took him on hunting trips, in which he witnessed Daddy Dearest killing people and then eating them. He would then see his father get arrested, which he resisted, causing him to be shot by a young James Gordon. Barton was put into foster care, but disappeared after a year, later resurfacing as a criminal called the Dollmaker. His mask is made of his dead father's skin. You might see where this is going. His whole shtick is creating dolls out of the skin and limbs of his victims. He is a serial killer, and he's also the one responsible for cutting off the Joker's face, an eerie element from the beginning of the New 52 in which the Joker had his face skin removed. He may not be the most frequent villain of the Dark Knights, but he's still really disgusting nonetheless, and a character that would unfortunately be really easy to believe as a realistic villain in this new cinematic adaptation. Number 10, Ted KROSBY. Let's start off our list with a little fella who was short-lived but totally disturbing. It's Ted KROSBY. Ted is from a limited series called Batman Tenses, which was first published back in 2003. It takes place roughly after Batman's first year active in Gotham, and it really tests the relatively young hero's psychological willpower. So, what is KROSBY guilty of? Well, one night he murdered a crap ton of people, mostly by stabbing them with a knife, and then consuming their flesh. He also skinned his father and wore Daddy Dearest's face on his own face. Oh, and he also ripped out his own eye. All in all, dude is clearly unhinged. He's also one of Batman's villains who gets away in the end, but because Bruce lets him, after brutally beating him down, with Ted basically implying that he intends on killing himself. Moving on to number 9, KIRK LANGSTROM. You might recognize KIRK as the fellow behind Man-Bat, a character who first debuted in Detective Comics issue 400 back in 1970. He was initially a zoologist that developed an extract that was supposed to give humans a bat's sonar sense. Testing the formula on himself, as all comic book characters do, he learned of a terrible side effect. It transformed him into the Man-Bat hybrid. But that classic version of Man-Bat isn't the focus of our number. Rather, it's his Justice League Gods and Monsters counterpart. In this world, KIRK is a pseudo-vampire, who was attempting to use the saliva of vampire bats to aid lymphoma research. Suffering from the disease himself, he was his own test subject, and while it cured him, it also turned him into a vampire-esque creature, who has a craving for blood, both animal and human, because vampires are technically cannibals. Speaking of vampires, let's move on to a very notable one for our next number. And at 8, Dracula of Earth 43. Yes, of course Batman faced off against Dracula, in a crossover called Batman and Dracula, Red Rain. The Cape Crusader takes on a monstrous version of the famous villain, who fed on human blood for centuries and centuries. The premise of this one is that Dracula pops up in Gotham, feeding on homeless people, drug addicts, and prostitutes, alongside his minions, slashing the throats of their victims in order to hide their bite marks, thus attempting to hide their true identity. But that ain't fooling Bruce Wayne. He gets right on it and fights Dracula, and it's exactly what you think it would be. Moving on to number 7, the Penguin. The Penguin is typically one of Bruce's more classy villains. He's done some pretty atrocious stuff over the years, but always manages to pull off his heinous actions with panache. That is, in the comics, for the most part. This version of Oswald that we're looking at though for this number comes out of a different DC universe, the Gothamverse. The Penguin, played by Robin Lord Taylor, has a moment in season 2 in an episode titled Wrath of the Villains Into the Woods, where he goes full-blown Hannibal Lecter. For context, poor Gothamverse Penguin doesn't have the sweetest of relationships relationships with his stepmother. She's a bit of a menace, and is the reason why his daddy dearest is dead. She also treats him like crap too. So what does a grade A criminal psychopath like him do? He whips up a meal for his stepmama, feeds it to her, and then tells her that the grub they are dining on is actually his two step-siblings that he murdered and then filleted, presumably. It's cruel, it's sick, and she totally deserves it, but a bit out of the Oswald canon that we've come to know from the comics. But hey, that is Gotham for you. That show is... it's a show. And at number 6, Solomon Grundy. Solomon Grundy doesn't typically eat humans, but in one instance, in what was arguably a show of power and simply the hulking mask proving a point, he eats a human arm. For context, this went down in Justice League of America's story arc called Tornado's Path. Red Tornado, who is an android, is tricked by Solomon to occupy a human body. This is when Solomon attacks, beating the crap out of him and ending off the fight by ripping off Tornado's arm, which is now human flesh and not a robot's arm. He then eats it. In at number 5, Emperor Joker. It should come as no surprise that there's an alternate of the Joker who feasts on human flesh. It's the least surprising one on this list, really, aside from the vampires. And technically, it's an alternate who appeared in a Superman title, not a Batman title. Now in Superman, Emperor Joker, we get to see the Clown Prince of Crime really mess around after getting his mitts on Mr. Mxyzptlk and his powers. That villain can manipulate reality. He isn't bound by third-dimensional laws and can break the fourth wall. He's also been a useful tool of DC's when it comes to retconning things. Anywho, Joker is all like, I'm gonna change reality into my liking, which of course has disastrous effects, including the Joker killing certain individuals daily, then resurrecting them just so he can murder them again. But there's one moment in particular that's not for the lighthearted, or the politically correct. Joker, at one point, decides to kill the entire population of China. Also, he can make a classless joke about eating Chinese food, with the food being, well, of course, all the dead people in China. Talk about commitment to the joke? Ugh. And at number 4, King Shark. When King Shark decides to take a chomp out of humans or consume a character whole, these days it's often used as comedic relief. Even in the New 52 run of Suicide Squad, King Shark decided to mow down on one of his teammates, Yo-Yo, which later proved to have a disturbing conclusion when Yo-Yo re-emerged, still alive. But it was funny as f. And that's because, well, King Shark is a shark. Can you blame him? King Shark initially started off as an antagonist of Superboy's, but has crossed paths with Batman, including in the latest DC Rebirth continuity. Anywho, in his first appearance, the character hit the scene by being connected to a string of disappearances of swimmers in Hawaii. You can take a guess as to where they ended up. His stomach. In case you didn't get that he was a cannibal. Yeah. From a shark to a croc, in at number 3 we have Killer Croc. Waylon Jones is a pretty obvious pick for this list. Cannibalism is nothing new for Killer Croc, who most memorably started dining on flesh after Hush planted a virus in his body, which caused him to crave and consume the human variety of delicacies. Croc legitimately didn't want this though. The virus, which also caused him to mutate more, was something he sought to cure, so he went to a scientist by the name of Dr. Maria Beleza, in hopes that her knowledge of the virus could help him get rid of his condition. No luck for Waylon though. In issue 810 of Detective Comics, in an attempt to cope with the fact that he'll never be cured, he ends up eating the doctor himself, which, I guess, dude man, don't eat doctors. Could have figured it out eventually, bro. Probably not though. And at number 2, Flamingo. Flamingo first hit the scene in Batman issue 666 in 2007, created by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. Despite his flamboyant circus attire and bright color palette, dude is pretty dead inside. He's an emotionless serial killer who eats his victims' faces after murdering them. He prides himself on how great he is at removing and eating faces, having initially practiced on his whole family. Flamingo was initially a villain of Dick Grayson's Batman, but made a comeback in the New 52, popping up in Arkham Asylum and a few other appearances where he generally acts as a traditional villain for Batman to beat down on before the comic gets into the meat of the story. No pun intended there. Gross. And finally at 1, Cornelius STIRK. STIRK is downright terrifying. Similar to Scarecrow, STIRK uses fear in order to get close and incapacitate his victims. The logic behind why STIRK is a killer is more nerve-wracking though. He firmly believes that he requires the nutrients and hormones from human hearts in order to stay alive, and that when feasting on those hearts, inducing fear into the victim prior to death is the best way to do that, and to season it for flavor. STIRK's story began when he was released from Arkham Asylum in Detective Comics issue 592 back in 1988. The character had been sent to Arkham originally at the age of 16 after he attempted to murder a classmate of his. How did he get released? Well, STIRK has another trick up his sleeve. He's got psychic powers. Yup. So he fooled his doctors at Arkham and was certified sane. Then he stopped taking his medication, which escalated him into becoming a full-blown serial killer and one of Batman's problems. Starting us off in at number 10, the Penny Plunderer. Penny Plunderer has to be a personal favorite of mine. First appearing in World's Finest Comics issue 30 in 1947, the Penny Plunderer, aka Joe Coyne, was a fellow who used to sell newspapers, but after he was caught stealing pennies, he became real hard and decided that a life of crime was for him. How did he commit his crimes? Well, everything had to be penny themed. This included wild schemes like putting Batman and Robin into a death trap shaped like a giant penny. He's the reason why Batman has the giant penny in his Batcave, although poor Penny Plunderer would later be retconned out of Bat's rogue gallery, and the giant penny was attributed to Two-Face as an item he once used to try to crush the Dark Knight. So, dude doesn't even get to keep his claim to fame. That's how much he annoyed Batman and DC. To be fair, he wasn't really operating on the best of business models, and surely he wouldn't have flowered in Canada. We stopped making pennies years ago. And at number 9, Dr. Doom. Now we're not talking about the Dr. Doom here of Marvel fame. Oh no. This dude's one and only appearance in DC Comics was during Detective Comics issue 158, and he didn't even get a real name. He was known solely as Dr. Doom, but don't think that he lives up to that name. His biggest claim to fame was an attempt to steal a sarcophagus. He failed, and then jumped into the ocean and hid under a dock while he was being chased by the authorities. But that's not the end of it. He then broke into the Batcave, but clearly didn't think his plan through because he then decided to just try to use all of the trophies in the Batcave to fight against the dynamic duo. This resulted in him throwing a grenade at Batman and then hiding inside the sarcophagus that he tried to steal. But then he got stuck inside of it, with the blast stealing the ancient coffin with him still inside of it. So yeah, technically Batman and Robin have a dead guy inside a sarcophagus in their Batcave that they never bothered to try to pry out and save. It was just that irritating, and I guess it wasn't worth it. And at number 8, Anarky. This V for Vendetta wannabe is Lonnie Mackin. Lonnie's motivation to becoming a criminal was that he had a pen pal when he was 11, and learned that his pen pal's life in his third world country sucked balls. He then decided to get woke, and learned all he could about politics. And then he decided that he was going to be the one who helped give the oppressed people of Gotham City hope. Right. Sure you will, buddy. Anarky's first move was to read a newspaper and then follow up on some workers' rights claims. Eventually though, he stirs up enough trouble and crosses paths with Batman, who then figures out that Anarky is just a kid. Oh, and while all this is happening, Anarky had somehow band together a group of homeless dudes, including one guy named Legs who was crippled, in order to help him fight for justice. So yeah, you can see why Batman would groan over this self-righteous guy. Coming in at number 7, Captain Stingaree. Can't help but feel bad for Captain Stingaree. For starters, he was one child of a set of quadruplets. He had a rough time growing up, and he dressed up as a pirate as a means of finding himself. He also falsely believed that one of his 3 twin brothers was secretly Batman. So Bruce Wayne, being the ultimate troll, decides to get all 3 of Stingaree's brothers to dress up like Batman in order to get him to stop stirring up trouble and lure him out. But really, it felt like it was more of a way for him to screw with Stingaree's head more than anything else. I guess sometimes you gotta have fun, right? And at number 6, the Ten-Eyed Man. The Ten-Eyed Man has 10 eyes, but they're on his damn fingertips. How is this even a thing, you guys? Okay, so real talks. In theory, this villain is only a major threat to himself. He can't do anything with his hands without seriously hurting one of his 10 eyes. You throw something his way, he'll go to catch it and bam! He's hurt his eyes. This actually happened too, by the way, with a shrub. He got tossed a shrub, and then he was in a lot of pain. First appearing in Batman issue 226 in 1970, he lost his eyesight from an explosion, but gained 10 other eyes in the tips of his fingers, and decided to take Batman on by demanding the Dark Knight meet him in Vietnam, since he was a war vet and wanted to fight on his own turf. For whatever reason, Bats went along with this, which eventually led to Ten-Eye Man being captured and imprisoned. He would later be removed from the DC Universe thanks to Crisis on Infinite Earths, where he was killed off. Yeah, no surprise there. Moving on to the midpoint of our list, in at 5, Crazy Quilt. A former thief and painter, Crazy Quilt first hit the scene in Boy Commandos issue 15 in 1946. Similar to our last number, he was blinded, cause of his tragedy being a gunshot wound, which led to the character to volunteer for an experimental procedure which would leave him only seeing bright colors. His main go-to from there was to use a helmet that hypnotizes victims with flashes of bright color, but really, he boiled down to committing petty crimes and vandalizing things, with his threats consisting of removing all color from Gotham. Okay? Batman doesn't have time for that, especially when it was revealed that Crazy Quilt was using a water-soluble dye to commit his crimes. Dude, ever hear of rain before? Guess not. Moving Moving on to 4, the Ventriloquist. First appearing in Detective Comics issue 583 in 1988, the alias of Ventriloquist has belonged to 3 different characters in the DC universe over the years. But for this number specifically, we're talking about the first version of him, Arnold Wesker. So why is this fellow annoying? Because without sticking his hand up the butt of his puppet, who was named Scarface, he's just a quiet, meek dude who is absolutely harmless. Scarface, the puppet, is a 1920s gangster, of course, who was used as a means of coping with the dissociative identity disorder that Wesker developed thanks to seeing his mom get assassinated by thugs from a rival mafia family. This puppet becomes a full-blown gangster when in use, Tommy gun and all, but here's the thing, Batman takes down crime bosses like it's a walk in the park. So a puppet-sized crime boss who isn't actually a crime boss, well, you can see why Bats would kinda groan over that. Not much of a threat. And at number 3, Polka Dot Man. The Polka Dot Man is another Batman villain that didn't manage to see the light of day for overly long. First appearing in 1962 in Detective Comics 300, Polka Dot Man, aka Abner Krill, decided, for unknown reasons, to become a criminal and make his MO putting dots in spots all over Gotham City. As you can imagine, Batman and Robin were like, yo dude, what are you doing? They shut him down real quick. Although kudos to him for managing to catch Robin, which felt like pure luck if we're being honest. Polka Dot Man's shtick is that the dots on his costume do a variety of interesting stuff, from creating weapons or morphing into an escape vehicle, which is as ridiculous as it sounds. Years later he would reappear, and aside from his costume, he basically abandoned his polka dot gimmick, instead choosing to use a baseball bat to assault a Gotham PD officer. Batman didn't even bother to get involved in that one, because Harvey Bullock got to Polka Dot Man first, and then beat the crap out of him, which led to Krill filing a lawsuit against the Gotham PD for police brutality. On the plus side, because of how utterly ridiculous this character was, he has appeared in a slew of other Batman-related media, including the animated series Batman the Brave and the Bold, and he's defeated there when Batman jumps in 3 dots in his uniform, causing him to tilt like a pinball machine and shut down. Character's even in the upcoming LEGO DC Supervillains game too, so hopefully he'll actually get a moment to shine there. At least, you know, for our benefit in terms of humor. Moving on to number 2, Condiment King. God bless Condiment King, really. He's a dude whose MO is to fire condiments at people. Hope you like ketchup. So for context, Condiment King came to be in the Batman the Animated Series, created by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. He was literally a mockery of the long list of silly Batman villains the Cape Crusader has had to fight over the years. His whole shtick was to use condiments to fight in battle. So ketchup, mustard, relish, probably mayo, you name it. I can see why people wouldn't want to get sprayed with mayo, to be perfectly honest. It's unappealing, but not really life-threatening, you know?
Suspect is a male costumed extremist, armed with what appears to be a ketchup gun.
It's gonna be one of those nights.
Condiment King didn't even prove to be much more than a nuisance for Batman. He ended up slipping on a puddle of ketchup that he had created, and nearly fell off a roof in the process. Tough luck, buddy. Finally, in at number 1, Kite Man. Kite Man is the product of creatives at DC running out of ideas when it came to whipping up new villains. Who in their right, totally not desperate mind would think, hey, you know what's pretty darn evil? Kites. Kites are evil. Let's make a villain whose entire persona is based around kites. Yeah, great work everybody. Great day at the office. Oh, dear lord. Kite Man, aka Charles Chuck Brown, first appeared in Batman issue 133 in August of 1960. So he's a prime Silver Age villain, that's for sure. Kite Man's whole shtick is that he has a glider kite contraption that he soars around in, along with a pretty silly costume. He appeared twice in the comics facing off against the Dark Knight, and poor Batman, in order to put an end to Kite Man's shenanigans, had to get a kite of his own to chase him. Kite fight! But Bruce wasn't the only hero that Kite Man tormented. He made Hawkman and Hawkgirl groan in frustration a few times too in the comics. The character went on to make an appearance in DC Rebirth as a very unstable individual whose catchphrase was, "Kite Man, hell yeah!" Yeah, you can imagine why that would be annoying.